Hello, and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. We are going to be talking about Moses and the river on which he was put on when he was born, and how it's not quite like some of the myths people like to say it is. Hello, and welcome back to Practical Christian Lessons. We are going to be reading an essay on Moses and the river, something we won't touch on in the Exodus narrative, and I know it's something of great interest to people, but I'll actually reference you to places where you can find it, is the actual Exodus itself. So most study Bibles you read and many commentaries for a long time only mentioned two routes. There's actually three routes people take, and it mentions the Aramaic route. I know James Michael Smith of Disciple Dojo is a big fan of that view. I'll link his. Actually, he has a playlist on the Exodus. I'll list his playlist going through theirs. And then there's an Egyptologist and others on YouTube. I'll find at least one other source, put that in a pinned comment for this video, and put that there for you guys to check out on the Exodus narrative. I do affirm it's an historical event. It's just not going to be important for the series. So, what we're looking at is taken from a river, the legend of Sargon and the story of Moses. This essay is on page 87 of the Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. If you want to find this, it might be out of print, but you might be able to get the digital notes somewhere online, such as logos. So, this is on Exodus 2. Discovered in the Assyrian archive in Nineveh, the legend of Sargon recounts in fantastic language the birth, ascension, and rule of Sargon of Akkad, who established his empire in Mesopotamia around 2300 BC, Sargon II, 721 through 705. A later Assyrian king who sought to emulate his namesake's meteoric rise to power probably commissioned the writing of this legend. The legend of Sargon resonates with a number of features also found in Moses' birth narrative in Exodus 2, 1 through 10. Sargon's mother was a high priestess, reminiscent of Moses' Levitical lineage. After his secretive birth, Sargon was placed in a reed basket, which was sealed with pitch and set adrift on a river. Aki, drawer of water, rescued the infant, adopted him, and raised him to be a farmer. Eventually, he found favor with the goddess Ishtar and was crowned king. Moses and Sargon's birth accounts employ a common ancient literary motif in which a hero is exposed to death during infancy, only to be rescued and to achieve greatness. The plot of the Sargon legend emphasizes the stunning and often miraculous nature of the hero's rise from obscurity to honor. In the case of Sargon II, use of the device may have been a deliberate attempt after the fact to legitimatize his own power grab. The biblical narrative, however, includes many unique features, such as the threat of national genocide, the attempt to hide the child, and his temporary return to his mother. Although the relationship between Sargonic and Mosaic narratives is still being debated, the details of Moses' birth unquestionably signify his heroic role in God's plan. It is helpful to bear in mind that the fictional tales commissioned by Sargon II was written much later than the factual biblical account of Moses' early life. And I'm just going to make a few quick side notes before getting into this a bit more. For people who say this only happens, we have stories in our own real world of people who go from obscurity to legend. How many people, like, I'm in the Western world of America, so we have many famous Hollywood actors who that's their story, right? Not clearly attempted to be killed and then floated down a river to safety, but rising from obscurity and having a very, very harsh origin to their story before rising to fame and power. And I'm going to read Exodus 2, 1 through 10 here. Now a man in the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket, we're going to return to that at the end of this, for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrews' women to nurse the babies for you?" "Yes, go," she answered, and the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. Of course, there's always the great irony of the mother still gets to raise her child for a time before he is then raised in the house of the man who tried to kill him. There's always good irony. But here, this is just an interesting note, and something I've really wanted to delve into and do an essay on at some point, and just haven't gotten the time to dig into it deeply. I've mentioned it in several. Is she got a papyrus basket. Here, the word used for basket, and you'll see it translated differently in other spots, is the same word, as far as I'm aware, used only once in the entire Old Testament, if not the entire Bible, is the same word for ark in Genesis 6 through 11. Just an interesting note there. And of course, in this entire entire Exodus narrative, there are many times the authors and editors are pulling, and of course God himself is the orchestrator of history, is pulling from the Genesis accounts and putting it into this Exodus narrative. There's intentionality there. They're wanting you to see things, draw parallels, draw connections, and sort of like see the plagues as this reverse act of creation. It's uncreating, if you will. That's a whole other thing there. The reason I wanted to bring up this essay, and I know I've talked about this in other videos, is people want to take a lot of the accounts of the biblical history and then be like, oh, this matches this myth over here, so therefore it's also a myth pulled from the same genre. And not only is that clearly not a good way of which to evaluate the evidence of something, it's also just dishonest. Mainly because it's not a good way to evaluate evidence, but there's no actual proof. A lot of the people who, at least in my experience, say this claim are just parroting the claim. They're not actually looking into it themselves. And as part of the whole point of the series is to sit down, look at the stories, and of course this is only giving a summary of these other narratives. But even in those summaries, you can see the stark differences between the biblical narrative and the other narrative that's being put forth. Like, just look at the extended Exodus narrative of Moses' life. His race to power is not him gaining favor with a deity. It is the Lord selecting him despite his massive shortcomings. And though Moses at one point attempted to, bring justice for his people, it then backfired on him. The story of Moses is not this great ascension to a place of power. It is God choosing him to deliver his people, who are a bunch of slaves and peasants and illiterate people of no worth as far as the world around them is concerned. But yet they are the Lord's chosen people. This is a very different story. Whether or not you want to compare them, you have to acknowledge the extreme differences between those two stories. And of course, as one said, Sargon's was probably to legitimize his power. I don't know why I can't say that word, which is super common in a lot of ancient tales. But as I mentioned in our last video on the biblical narratives, when you're doing that exact thing to lift people up, what you don't do is paint them as extremely human in all their flaws and their errors, right? We see in Moses' tale, he is not a perfect man. He is a great man. He's a great saint of the church, but he's not perfect. When you see these tales of Sargon and others, especially in ancient literature, it sands over those things. It makes them extraordinary, heroic, above the top. And that's normal. And as I said in our last video, that's things that we just as people do. But that's not what's happening here. So not only are there clear differences in the tale that's being told, in the actual historical, like we look in history and can compare these two things. They are two very different stories. We can then also compare the figures in them and see how starkly different they are portrayed. And that is 3 big indicators on why we need to be looking at tales like this in the Bible as markedly different than the myths and such of the ancient world. And I think that's where we're going to end it today. I think that is a good short summary, unlike some of the times I try to do these videos where I go a little off the rails here. So if you guys want to continue to engage this conversation, feel free to push back on me below if you disagree, or comment below. Like, if we skip over a lot of passages. If you think there might be an essay in there, I skip over quite a few of the essays in this book. And not saying we won't get to them some other time, but they're just not relevant for the series. So if you're interested in maybe if there's some essays in there on certain things, ask me, and I'll take a look and let you know. And as well, for anyone wanting to look into the faith as an inquirer, to really dig into it, see if there's truth to these things, look at our Trinitarian series, see if, my claims in that series that the Trinity isn't an invention, it's been the faith of the church for as long as the church has been around, which gives credence to the claims of the church and how ancient they are. Feel free to join our Discord. It's open for Protestants and those who are inquiring into the Christian faith. So check that out. With that, you guys have a wonderful day. Go in peace. God bless.